Some days ago, I randomly decided it was time to find some other content creators on YouTube for Arena of the Planeswalkers. So I typed in Arena of the Planeswalkers tier list, seeing what other people thought of the game. You'll be shocked what I found. Or what I didn't find. Pretty much everything were like, knockoffs of AOTP, Magic Spell Slingers, the Magic the card game. Things that, honestly, they're all just inferior to AOTP. Shout out to Two Bats Gaming here, though. He actually had an AOTP Strongest Color video. He doesn't look like he's active anymore, though. But other than his video, I pretty much found nothing talking about like the power of AOTP cards. So I thought, it's my turn to contribute to this masterpiece of a game. Welcome to a 5-piece series where I am going to be reviewing all 5 of AOTP colors in depth and giving you my thoughts on how powerful I personally believe each color is. One big point for me to make before I continue, in general, I think AOTP is quite akin to chess in that you want to do a lot to protect your Planeswalker, who's effectively your king. So, when I'm reviewing spells and army cards, I generally rank them higher if 1. They're capable of dealing direct damage to figures in general, which includes creatures and planeswalkers. Number 2, if they are capable of healing planeswalkers. And number 3, if they make it easier for your key figures to deliver game-winning attacks against hero figures and especially against planeswalkers. Number 4, cards that are dead in hand when you're playing against a heroes-only army will generally be ranked lower due to my own personal belief that the heroes-only armies seem actually quite strong and viable for the AOTP meta. So, now that we've laid out the general guidelines for how I like to rank these cards, let's move on to the meat of this video, white. So the theme, at least in the Magic the Gathering, the trading card game, white is supposed to be about order, life, healing, community, peace, justice, morality, religion, things like that. Again, I'm not an MTG master, but I did a quick Google search and got some ideas. In general, before I start talking about the actual cards, I'll go through like the top few things I like about white and then the weaknesses I see in white. Number 1, white is tough as nails in combat when they have the enchantments piled on. They love their toughness enhancers, things like Gideon's Phalanx, Survive the Night, Honor of the Pure, are a few of just many which make white hard to remove from the board via combat dice. It's really not uncommon to have white creatures rolling 6 or more defense dice, where most other colors can only dream of that feat. Number 2, they have healing that would make Deadpool blush. The sheer number of spells that can heal the myriad of figures, especially heroes, is beyond what other colors offer. We have things like Healing Salve, Swift Justice, Near-Death Experience, Hope Against Hope. All these cards are fantastic value that can easily find use in a lot of white builds. Number 3, and I'm going to emphasize this a bit, heroes. The heroes only builds for white are just really freaking annoying to deal with all the healing that they have between Chaplain's Blessing, Angel's Mercy, Hope Against Hope, Healing Salve, Swift Justice. All of that squad hatred that black and blue generally have, white's heroes don't put up with any of that kindergartner's play. Black's insta-kills and blue's unsummons have no effect on heroes at all. Most of the time, heroes in AOTP are going to be killed the old-fashioned Heroescape way, straight up attack dice. And when white's enemies finally manage to get 2 or 3 wounds on the 6 or even 8 life heroes like the Eldrazi, white can just heal it off with one of the healing spells I mentioned earlier. On to the weak points of white. White is very much going to build their armies primarily of range 1 figures, and oftentimes those figures will also have 5 move. Luckily, Evastian and the core Aeronaut Captain do have 6 move and flying, so they are quite mobile, and they do also have a slightly longer threat range. The core Hookers also have a threat range of 8 because they offer a range of 3, which is better than most of the other white stuff. But in general, white's board position is static and predictable. They don't offer like mobility or even high range. things that allow them to have surprise movement or surprise high range attacks. Or there's nothing in white that gives them the ability to do something that the opponent isn't expecting. Like blue. Blue has all the movement shenanigans, and even green has a little bit of it with like disengage and some movement buffs. Number 2, they're just terribly weak to spells. While I love tossing tons of toughness enchantments and rolling tons of defense dice in combat, those aren't good for anything else. Every other color can get around tons of enchantments and defense dice, especially when the defending white figure in question is a squatty. Black has good options for doing true damage and outright killing squad creatures. Blue can unsummon squads, which also destroys the enchantments on them. They can manipulate buffed white squads with things like Mind Control and Welcome to the Fold, and they can also use Misdirection to take white's enchantments for themselves, or Scatter to the Wind to shove it out of play and back onto the deck, and even things like Scatter Arc to mess with white's enchantments. Red has boatloads of true damage, which just ignores all the tons of toughness, and they have a lot of power buffs, which basically matches what white offers in toughness buffs. Green probably has a slightly tougher matchup against white. They have a few true damage kinds of spells like Moonlight Hut and Elvish Blade Finesse, as well as things like Primeval Light and Naturalize, which destroy white's enchants to bring them back down to earth. But green doesn't have a lot of that stuff in spades, and I think green is generally going to rely on attack dice to kill white. So, to lay out the rules, or I guess foundations of why I rank things the way I do, most of my positions are based on a standard 1v1 or potentially a 2v2 game, where the goal is either to kill the enemy planeswalker or to wipe out their entire army. I'm not going to typically consider things like capture the flag or odd kinds of victory conditions. So keep that in mind as I go through this list. In logical fashion, since I'm starting off with the color that I believe is the worst, at least when you're using squads or a mix of squads and heroes, white, I'm going to start off with what I think is the absolute worst white spell. Stasis Snare, costing 20 points from the Battle for Zendikar. This one is, if anyone's familiar with Demonic Appetite from Black, it's basically you drop this thing on one of your opponent's cards, and when they, take their turn with that squad and come and attack your squad figures, or I guess it's your creatures, but when they come and attack your creatures, once they get a kill on one of your creatures, they can't attack anymore. I'm not a big fan of this one in particular, or Demonic Appetite, for this reason, because it's asking you to first start losing before it does anything to help you. So I guess it's like insurance, but I believe in AOTP, you don't really want like losing insurance. You want stuff that's going to accelerate your ability to win and not decelerate your ability to lose. So this Stasis Snare just scores absolutely atrocious in my book. Well, number one, because it doesn't stop them from killing your planeswalker. So it's like you can drop this on your enemy, your enemy's squad, and they can still just come and attack your planeswalker and kill him, and then also continue attacking your other creatures if you have creatures left afterwards. Because Stasis Snare only triggers when they kill a creature in combat, and that does not include planeswalkers. But I think Stasis Snare in general is probably even worse than Demonic Appetite, because Black can at least afford to sacrifice some of its figures, like its squads, like the Restless Zombies especially, and just feed them and be like, here you go, like I'll eat all my zombies and discard all of your cards for killing them because of Demonic Appetite. Where White doesn't have any ability to resurrect its figures. So it doesn't want to lose its figures to begin with, where Black cares a lot less about losing some of its figures. So Stasis Snare, bottom of the barrel. I'm not a big fan. Next one on the chopping block, Sanctified Charge, or as I sometimes like to call it, Skanktified Charge. 10 points from the original, I'll just call it the Master set, I guess, but the original Arena of Planeswalkers set. This one, this is another one. Of course, this is the second to worst white card in my opinion. But this one just feels confused. Just almost as confused as Stasis Snare. At least it's not asking you to to lose a whole figure before it does anything. But it's asking you to take a turn with your Planeswalker in order to heal your squad, which feels very at odds with just efficiency in this game. Because if you had a full squad that's alive, even if some of them are damaged, you still want to take a turn with that squad. I would imagine 8 or 9 times out of 10 to roll those extra attacks. Because your single Planeswalker, unless you're playing Sorin, your single Planeswalker is only getting 1 attack per turn. And even then, Sorin, you can't always get multiple attacks with him because your opponent may spread their figures out. So it's like you may potentially heal 1 wound from a figure with Sanctified Charge by taking a turn with your Planeswalker. It doesn't feel very worthwhile when you can take a turn with either 2 or 3 squaddies and get multiple attacks in. And squads are also more easily buffed by all of White's other spells, where it's much harder to buff a Planeswalker with enchantments. So yeah, I'm just not impressed with this card. It feels very inefficient. It could use like a little bit of rewording. I'm not sure how I would reword it, but it needs to do something different. I always see good use for this card, I guess, towards the end of a game when you might have 1 squad figure left with maybe has 1 or 2 life left, and maybe your Planeswalker is in a pretty good position where he can just slay something and he start healing up so that you have like a slightly better end game. But this is not a card I would like build around to be like, oh yeah, once one of my guys take damage, I just start dumping all of my turns on my Planeswalker to heal them all up. That feels very inefficient. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. I've had enough about Sanctified Charge. We're moving on. Silver Strike, 15-pointer from Shadows over Innistrad. I'm not a big fan of this one, mostly because it's anti-squad only. I don't really care much for only killing my opponent's squads because, again, you bring up the white heroes armies, which in my opinion are quite powerful and quite good because of things like this. Because if you have Silver Strike in your hand and you're playing against a heroes only army, Silver Strike is actually dead in hand because it can only kill a squad creature. Using Silver Strike in a legitimate way, like when you do have an enemy squad on the other team, in my mind, I just feel like you generally wait until they get close to your Planeswalker, and then you just summon 3 of your guys next to one of their squaddies, and then just use Silver Strike to kill them on the spot. I don't think I'd want to actively take a turn with my squad, move them to surround 1 guy, and then use Silver Strike to kill that guy, because then what are you attacking? Like, you need to be able to use your attack phase, your attack, what is it, your action 4 attack for something. This is definitely one of those things with White where it's like, they want everyone to be in a big ball clumped up, because that's when Silver Strike is going to shine the most, is when there's 8 squad figures all in the middle, just clumped up in mayhem. So then you can move your guys in there, surround 1 squad, 1 squad figure from the enemy squad, play Silver Strike on them, and then also have other nearby squaddies to attack, so you're not just wasting your action 4 to do nothing. On to the next. Sun Lance at 30 points from Battle for Zendikar. This one is kind of similar to Silver Strike. I do rate it slightly higher because it's, in a way, you kind of guarantee yourself a squad kill by announcing an attack. Effectively, you just say, oh, I attacked that guy, and then you can just later play Sun Lance and the dude's dead regardless of how the attack went. It is quite steep for 30 points though, and again, as before, this card has no use against a heroes only deck. It does let you get an insta-kill through Green's Fog, because Green's Fog doesn't prevent insta-kills, it only prevents damage, and Sun Lance does not do damage, it destroys. You really hate Fog? Go ahead and toss Sun Lance or even Silver Strike in your deck, because those will both work through Fog. Alright, Ghostly Possession at 25 points from Shadows over Innistrad. This one is definitely pretty expensive. For 25 points, you get to choose a single squad figure that, for the rest of the turn, he gets 0 base power, and 1 base toughness. That's a pretty tough sell. I will say that in particular, this is very good against Blue's Leyline Phantoms and Lantern Geists, because they have, significantly higher toughness than your average, 3 or 2 toughness figures. But also one other minor positive I will give to Ghostly Possession is that it does work pretty well with White's Swift Justice and as well as Sorin for when you need to get healing in, because when you knock, some figures base toughness down to 1, and then you use Swift Justice, again, that's lifesteal, and or if you're using Sorin, you're going to be more likely to get a ton of damage in there and then, successfully heal. But other than that, I feel like Ghostly Possession should have been costed like at 15 points. Not a completely terrible card. It's almost usable. All right, on to the next. We have Seize the Initiative at 10 points from Battle for Zendikar. This one is quite ridiculous, that you have to roll more crossed swords, more hits, than the total dice that the defending figure will be rolling effectively. I mean, against most creatures, like if you roll 5 hits against them, 5 hits is probably going to kill almost any creature, like maybe bar a couple of the heroes. But like 5 hits is going to kill like any squad creature almost every time, regardless of if they roll 3 or 4, defense dice. It's not going to go their way. So the card is it feels counterintuitive to me, because it's like, well, most figures have, I'm going to average and say it's about 3 toughness. So it's like if you roll 4 hits, 4 crossed swords against a guy with 3 toughness, you are probably getting 3 wounds or 3 damage through that attack anyway. But you're taking a whole nother gamble in that you have to play Seize the Initiative first, and then hope that when you roll your 5 or 6 attack dice, whatever attack dice you're rolling, you have to hope that you actually roll 3 or 4 hits, which is a gamble in and of itself. I guess to kind of go along with Ghostly Possession below, if you can kind of combine Seize the Initiative and Ghostly Possession together, because then like if you roll 2 hits, you're almost guaranteed that the other guy isn't rolling defense at all. But again, what's the difference? Like if they're rolling 1 or 2 defense, they're not blocking a ton of damage with that much defense anyway. We got Not Forgotten at 15 points from Shadows over Innistrad. This might be a sleeper in a white build that has like tons of cheap creatures. I primarily think of like a Nahiri or a Sorin build that's using things like the Eldrazi Scions, the Flamewing Phoenixes, the Core Hookers, the Restless Zombies. Like you toss in a bunch of those squads that are like 70 points or less, because Nahiri and Sorin can, at 600 points, they can field 4 cards worth of summons. So I feel like they could. I think this is especially potent with Sorin, because if you give him a bunch of extra attack via Not Forgotten's effects, by killing his creatures when they're next to him, he is going to be like dummy powerful and then impossible to kill when he can one-shot almost everything that you own. However, again, it's kind of a bummer that this is just a card that doesn't do anything until you're losing units. But at least it's actively making your Planeswalker much stronger, which is very nice, especially in the case of Sorin. It ups the ante for him, like, significantly, for your opponent to have to deal with Sorin instead of dealing with the squads, because they don't want to power up Sorin. Sorin's going to start eating everybody for breakfast and healing nonstop. I wouldn't bother using Not Forgotten. I don't feel like it would work well with Gideon. And again, maybe it's just something I haven't used enough yet. But particularly, I see this working better with Sorin and Nahiri. On to the next one of the most expensive spells in the game. Fell the Mighty at 45 from Shadows over Innistrad. This is kind of similar to Black's Killing Wave. And for those of you unfamiliar with Killing Wave, it does 3 damage to all non-zombie squad creatures adjacent to your Planeswalker. This is basically, in a lot of ways, it's the same thing. It's just kill everything that's not white that's next to your Planeswalker. We'll kill every squad creature that's not white that's next to your Planeswalker. It's definitely powerful for killing squads, but again, considering its high cost, if you toss this thing in there for 45 points, and then you come across, your opponent brings the a heroes only build, you have a 45-point total waste right here because it's going to do nothing for you. I would also say that this card is less useful for Nahiri or Sorin if they are fielding non-white squads, because friendly fire is certainly a thing based on the wording of this card. It says all, I think it says all non-white squads, so that includes your own. So just be very careful. This feels like it's definitely a white supremacist card and not really so much for Nahiri or Sorin. Marked by Honor. Marked by Honor might be like a decent midpoint. This one, it's a hidden enchant. It's a 10-pointer from the original Arena of Planeswalkers. The payload of this sucker for just 1 toughness, it's not really super powerful. It certainly goes in line with White's theme, but this is another one where it's like it's kind of middle of the road for me. But I honestly don't ever try to use this. One thing to note though is when you have this and you're using Sorin, is that you can use Marked by Honor and or Strangling Soot and or Mental Agony in your deck, and those are all hidden enchant squads. And you can use that to bluff that, if you put Marked by Honor on your squad, you might be able to trick your opponent into thinking you have Strangling Soot or Mental Agony on them instead. So it might, make your opponent be more weary of attacking your squad. Feels, I'm not sure how often people will actually fall for that, or if they even care for the effects of Strangling Soot or Mental Agony in the average situation. But it's something to consider when using Sorin and this card. Stone Will for 20 points coming out of Shadows over Innistrad. This card is it seems pretty amazing for Sorin. One of my battle reports on Hero Escapers, I literally saw Sorin come back from 5 wounds, from having 5 damage on him, so 1 life remaining. He pulls out Stone Will. He literally top decks it at the start of his turn, puts it on Sorin, and then goes in and slays 3 figures in a row, like on the same turn, because of Sorin's Blade Master. Fully heals him. I do think Stone Will has a lot of potential with Sorin. Again, because as Sorin gets higher attack, he just becomes more and more unstoppable because he's one-shotting more and more stuff and therefore healing more and more. Stone Will seems pretty reasonable with Nahiri as well because she has a higher base life, which means she can trigger Stone Will power bonus while still having a decent amount of life remaining. But as far as Gideon goes, again, I think Gideon is probably one of the worst Planeswalkers. Spoiler alert. But I probably wouldn't bother using Stone Will on Gideon. I don't know. There's just something about it. I think Gideon cares more for supporting his squads rather than trying to do the killing himself. Alright, we're up to Blessing at 30 points from Arena of the Planeswalkers the main master set. It's a hidden enchant. This one, it's not a bad card. The buffs here, they look really good on paper. But Blessing I particularly put down a couple notches because it's a hidden enchantment, which means it has no effect until your opponent attacks into the squad that you enchant with this card. I tend to prefer Divine Favor for this reason. Divine Favor I can just play on my card on my turn and benefit from +1 power for the turn when I'm attacking. I can do that immediately. Blessing, I have to wait until my opponent attacks me, which means my opponent has opportunities to destroy my squads before I can benefit from the +1 power of Blessing. But Blessing's not a terrible card, not at all. I'm usually quite happy to include it in my white builds. Probably include Divine Favor first if I didn't already have Divine Favor in my deck before I put Blessing in. On to the next one, we got Spare from Evil at 20 points from Shadows over Innistrad. This one is actually quite unique. I don't think there are any cards in AotP that do anything like it. This one even allows you to enchant enemy squads and ally squads, although I don't see any competitive reasons for enchanting your enemy squads with this card. Spare from Evil is particularly good counter to the Ghoul Vanguard if you want to at least attempts to prevent him from zombifying your squaddies with his Wake the Dead. You make a pretty good effort to stop him from killing them in combat. Another point in favor of Spare from Evil is that it doesn't say, that it only blocks combat damage. It just says when the squad is dealt damage. The wording on the card allows it to block spell damage and or ability damage too, so it's quite flexible. Kind of a special note that I thought of. It appears to me, based on the wording of this card, that you can prevent one wound, one damage from like your first instance when you have a squad take damage. So you put one damage on Spare from Evil, and then the next time your enchanted squad would take 2 or more damage, you can take 2 of that damage and put it on Spare from Evil, due to the wording on the card saying you can put up to 2 at once onto the card. Which means altogether you would have prevented 3 damage, and then at that point it would be destroyed. Solemn Offering. 25 points from the original Master Set. This is White's only way to destroy an enchantment other than killing an actual figure or the army cards associated with the figures. At 25 points, that is definitely pretty expensive, and frankly it might not even stop your opponent from getting the value from their enchantment ahead of time from something like Fire Breathing, where a red player could play Fire Breathing on like their fire cats, run in and attack you, and they might kill a couple of your figures, and then back on your turn, you can play Solemn Offering to kill Fire Breathing, but Fire Breathing has already gotten some value because your opponent literally used it and killed some of your figures. It has buffed some of their attacks. So I'm not super impressed with Solemn Offering. I think it's a decent enough card because it's the only way that White can get rid of an enchantment. And so you can destroy like really annoying black enchantments if you really want to. So it offers unique utility that White just does not have otherwise. On to the next card, Battle-Wise Valor, 10-pointer, Arena of the Planeswalkers Master Set. I think here is where we're getting into the cards that I would very often use in my White builds. Battle-Wise Valor is a hidden enchant for your squad. It's unfortunate that White does have this massive Achilles heel and how they can, they have all these wonderful toughness buffs. But all the toughness buffs mean nothing to things, like Black's Bone Splinters, or Corrupt, or a lot of Red's direct damage, like Incinerate or Dual Shot. Like, all that just simply says, put damage on the figure. So it's like, it doesn't matter if Battle-Wise Valor gives you, 8 toughness for a turn. After combat's over, they might just use Killing Wave and destroy everything anyway. But for 10 points, you really can't go wrong. This is pretty fairly priced, and I think it's a very decent card. Gideon's Phalanx, 10 points from Arena of the Planeswalkers. Anyone who's familiar with HeroScape, I kind of like to think of Gideon's Phalanx as the Raylin to Stoke the Flames Tailord. Stoke the Flames being a red card which gives all of your figures, all the figures around that Planeswalker +1 power. Gideon's Phalanx, it enchants your Planeswalker and gives all of your figures around it +1 toughness. Fun thing about Gideon's Phalanx, though, that Stoke the Flames can't do, or doesn't allow you to do, Gideon's Phalanx doesn't say that you can only enchant your own Planeswalker with it. So as funny as it sounds, you might actually want to put Gideon's Phalanx on a friendly Planeswalker, or even a enemy Planeswalker, and then send all of your white figures charging towards them, because when your white figures are within 4 spaces, or 4 clear sight spaces, of that enchanted Planeswalker, they will get +1 toughness, because you are the owner of the enchantment. It's a funny way to use it. It basically turns your opponent's Planeswalker into like a pot of honey, so that you can send, all the bees after it. But all in all, Gideon's Phalanx, again, even if you use it on your own Planeswalker, I think it's a pretty decent buy. Most white Planeswalkers are going to be relatively close to the fray, given, Gideon, Sorin, and Nahiri. They all have pretty low range. So, and again, even if you don't want to use any of them in the middle of the combat, just enchant your opponent's Planeswalker with Gideon's Phalanx and send your guys in to get the benefits from it. Your opponent won't be very happy with that plan. Alright, and we're starting to hit the good stuff. Survive the Night. And this is going to be a 10-pointer from Shadows over Innistrad. This is a hidden enchant for heroes, kind of like Battle-Wise Valor, but this one is for heroes instead of squads. Considering how I placed the White Heroes build at number 3, this is almost always in my White Hero armies. Survive the Night sincerely helps your heroes hold an important spot for 1 turn, so that way they can lay the smackdown on the following turn. It's quite helpful. Has the same problems as Battle-Wise Valor. As I said earlier, it doesn't protect, against direct damage. Cards that say deal damage to figure. Luckily, heroes don't usually have to worry quite as badly about those kinds of cards, but they are vulnerable to some of them nonetheless. Solid card. I do like Survive the Night. Skillful Lunge, 5-pointer. Shadows over Innistrad. 5 points just to give one of your melee squaddies +2 power and and extend their range by 1. Seems like a really good deal to me. Even though they have that stupid stipulation that you have to be attacking something that's on the same level, it's just a really odd requirement. I think Skillful Lunge is useful in any white build that has any squads in it. For 5 points, you basically get +2 power for one of your guys. In particular, for Nahiri, I would use Skillful Lunge, like maybe with the Blazing Firecats, and then use something like Twin Flame, and you'll be getting out a ton of damage from that from that Blazing Firecat. So Skillful Lunge definitely a good cheap card. Total White Domination in a nutshell. Honor of the Pure, 35 pointer from Arena of the Planeswalkers. And while I'm a strong believer that some of White's best builds are heroes only, Honor of the Pure can actually still be used for those armies. So Honor of the Pure doesn't say you have to enchant your own squad with it. You can bring Evasian and the core Aeronaut Captain into your game, and when your opponent starts summoning their squads, put Honor of the Pure on them while your core Aeronaut Captain and or your Evasian are alive and undamaged. They get to benefit from Honor of the Pure. Just because you enchant the opponent's squad with it doesn't mean you don't control the card. It's still in your control. For a heroes only build, I'm not sure I would rely on enchanting my opponent's squads just to get the benefits. Mostly because you probably want to kill your opponent's squads, which means you'll eventually be killing your own enchantment. Under the real use for Honor of the Pure is really when you're using at least one squad of your own, or even like a squad plus a hero in your white build. And White's Healing especially does a fantastic job of keeping your figures topped off so that you're always benefiting, or very often benefiting. And solid Total White Domination card, as long as you're using all white figures, the solid card. If you're using Nahiri or Sorin, you don't want to include the Eldrazi Scions, the Bloodline Nobles, the Blazing Firecats, the Restless Zombies, the Skurzdag Cultists. None of that. You don't want any of that in your deck if you're going to be using Honor of the Pure. Up to the beauty that I talked about earlier, Divine Favor. 25 points from the base Arena of Planeswalkers set. As I mentioned, Blessing gives you +1 power, +2 toughness. This one is 5 points cheaper and is not a hidden enchant. I like Divine Favor a lot. It's also comparable to Red's Power of Fire. Divine Favor seems like it's a pretty good card on Red's Burny Kitties. Giving the Blazing Firecats +1 power and +1 toughness if you're using Nahiri seems like a pretty savage move. I would be quite scared of that if I had seen it. I don't think I've actually ever tried that myself. I like Divine Favor. It's placed this high because you can just drop it on your own turn. You put it on your figures, you get that +1 power for that turn. You go in and you make somebody hurt and show them what true white power is about. Alright, we're getting up into the higher tiers of cards, some of the ones I like more. Inspired Charge, 20 points from Arena of Planeswalkers. If you're familiar with Green's Overrun, this is pretty similar to that. I would just call this White Overrun, effectively. Yeah, +2 power. I mean, this is quite lenient to say you have to be within 8 clear sight spaces of your Planeswalker at the resolution of the card. Pretty decent card. This one even, Inspired Charge even buffs your heroes as well, which I'm not sure if it's worth it for a heroes-only white build. I haven't tried it. It's probably not completely terrible for that use, just to be like, hey, I want to give my hero +2 power for 1 turn. But I think particularly you want to save this, again, for similar use to Green's Overrun, where Green's Overrun says you pick a squad and that squad gets +2 power. I would use Inspired Charge pretty similarly to be like, hey, I just want to give my Rhinos or Rox Veterans +2 power for the turn and then just go smash my opponent. Oh, and one special case I do want to note is actually this works nicely with Sorin and or the Ghoul Vanguard in particular. You have to have the Ghoul Vanguard in your army. So you can play Inspired Charge, which affects your Ghoul Vanguard and any zombies or whatnot. And then when you activate your Ghoul Vanguard, you get to get your free move and attack with the zombie, who again benefits from Inspired Charge if they were within 8 clear sight spaces when you played it. So your zombie gets +2 attack, goes up and attacks, and then the Ghoul Vanguard gets his +2 attack, or +2 power, and he can move up and attack as well. So that's a really powerful use of Inspired Charge, along with the Ghoul Vanguard, which it really ups his odds of getting a kill, and using his Wake the Dead to spawn a zombie. Inspired Charge is a pretty darn good card. I think in almost every white build that includes squads, you have to use this card. I don't feel like you can afford to not use it. White really needs all the help it can get to kill its opponents. Hope Against Hope, a 20-point hidden enchant from Shadows over Innistrad. This one is a hero healer. I score this a little bit lower than, I mean, if you haven't noticed already, there's a lot of healing cards I haven't touched on yet. But this one scores the lowest because of its high cost, higher relative cost anyway. And also that it's a hidden enchant, which again, I typically will knock these kinds of hidden enchants that you want to use it on your turn, but you have to wait for your opponent to actually flip it over for you before you can use it on your turn. Like again, with things like Blessing, where it's like, I really want that +1 power now. Hope Against Hope is kind of similar in that you want, like sometimes it's like you might have a hero that's almost dead, and you're like, oh no, like you can put Hope Against Hope on the hero, but if they get attacked, they can still die before the start of your turn where you can actually activate Hope Against Hope. So you really want to put it on your hero while they're healthy, or maybe while they only have 1 or 2 damage on them, because it's definitely not your on-demand healer. One other thing to note, Hope Against Hope and Survive the Night are both hidden enchant heroes, and they encourage different ways of dealing with them, which I kind of find this, I don't know if I'll call it a synergy or what, but Hope Against Hope kind of demands that your opponent burst into your hero and kill them quickly before you, as the white player, have the ability to use the healing of Hope Against Hope. Where Survive the Night tends to want your opponent to just tap your hero and then wait until the turn ends and kill your hero on a turn afterwards. So I like that when you include Hope Against Hope and Survive the Night in your deck, when you put one on the hero, your opponent has no idea how to deal with it. Because if they go all in and trying to kill your hero in one shot, if they flip it over and it's Survive the Night, it's going to be much harder to kill your hero. Where if they poke you, they only poke the hero with like a weak 3 power attack, and then it's Hope Against Hope, well, now you're just going to heal off any potential damage or any previously taken damage. So I really like the, I guess it's a dichotomy between those two cards. It's very interesting, and it makes it kind of risky for your opponent to all in blindly or to only poke lightly. It's pretty neat. Solid card. I think I would include it in most of my Heroes Only builds. Swift Justice, the 5-point El Cheapo from the original Arena of the Planeswalkers. It's basically lifelink on demand. Not a bad card at all for 5 points. And in case all of White's other healing cards aren't enough for you, all you have to do is spam power on some figure and then use this card, and you have basically built-in healing. It should come naturally that Swift Justice scales a lot better if you can stack a lot more power on whatever creature you give the lifelink to. And the very next thing about this card is that you can give lifelink to a hero creature. And given the powerful white creatures, the powerful hero creatures like Eldrazi Ruiner or the core Aeronaut Captain who have base 6 power, they are almost always going to heal at least 1 damage, from Swift Justice. And then if you can tack on something like Inspired Charge or Tenacity, if you can tack on any amount of power buffs with the Eldrazi Ruiner and the core Aeronaut Captain, they're going to heal off a ton of damage. It's wonderful. For 5 points, this card is just... This is utterly disgusting how good this can be on even a decent attack roll with the Eldrazi Ruiner. To note, you can use this with your squad figures as well, but due to their lower life values and lower power values, you're much less likely to get a lot of value out of Swift Justice, by rolling 3 or 4 attack dice to heal maybe 1 or 2 wounds, because your squads only have 3 life total. So in general, I would say Swift Justice is definitely better for heroes, but again, at 5 points, if you use it for a squaddy and nothing pans out, no big loss. It was a 5-point card. You didn't spend a ton of your deck points on it. Up next, we have Tenacity, a 10-point enchantment, enchant hero or planeswalker from Shadows over Innistrad. These higher most white spells that we're getting to, I think I have 5 spells left, 4 spells left after this. So Tenacity is very high on my list for white spells because it enables White's heroes to be even more disgusting than they already are. Literally, it's like if you enchant the hero creature and he becomes engaged to anything, he gets +1 power while attacking anything he's engaged to. And since all of White's heroes, or at least all of the heroes that White can use, which is Evasian, Eldrazi Ruiner, and the core Aeronaut Captain, they're all range 1. So Tenacity can basically just be Enchanted Hero gets +1 power. For 10 points, that's really not that bad. And I think actually the Ghoul Vanguard will like this card a lot because again it ups his capacity to kill other figures and raise them up via Wake the Dead. So fantastic card again. I wouldn't typically place Tenacity on my Planeswalker or even use Tenacity in a squads build for White. Tenacity only scores as high because of how great it makes the hero only White builds. Angel's Mercy. 15-pointer from Shadows over Innistrad. I mean, just like anything else I've said before, some of White's best builds includes nothing but heroes. So Angel's Mercy is a no-brainer when you have heroes only. Take a turn with your hero, play Angel's Mercy, heal up to 3 damage. What's not to love with this card? It's basically perfect to spam, to charge your fat Eldrazi Ruiner towards your opponent and just laugh maniacally as your opponent struggles to do anything to him because you're healing everything off. Angel's Mercy is a completely insane card. Not much more to add. Near-Death Experience for 10 points from the original AOTP set. This is just good Planeswalker healing. It's basically the same as Green's Bountiful Harvest. We're paying 5 points per damage that we heal off of our Planeswalker. Just a good card to extend the life of your Planeswalker when, the Planeswalker is very much the key to your army. You need your Planeswalker alive to play spells at all and to summon creatures. So anything that keeps them alive for longer is a very good card in my book. The second to best White card, Chaplain's Blessing, 20 points from Shadows over Innistrad. Very similar to Angel's Mercy in that you're going to use this card primarily in a heroes only White build. It's completely savage. You get to heal off 2 damage and then give your guy a +1 power counter. Here you have to laugh at your opponent to be like, oh, you tried to kill my hero? Well, not only am I going to undo that damage, but now I'm going to kill you even harder. It's definitely going to force your opponent's hand. Your opponent's going to have to work even harder to destroy that hero even faster because they're becoming, not only are they getting more life, but they're becoming a bigger threat than they were before. And at number 1, Healing Salve. 10-point card from Arena of the Planeswalkers. 10 points. This gets you the ability to heal 2 points of damage from any friendly figure. You may heal one of your squad creatures, one of your hero creatures, an ally squad creature, or an ally's hero creature. And drawing a card is also very excellent considering this is the only card that White has, which allows it to draw any extra cards at all. It's just extremely efficient, very widely useful, and frankly I think it belongs in every single White build, whether you're using Gideon, Nahiri, or Sorin. This is just a killer card. I feel like this could easily be costed 20 points, and it would still be very good. I have nothing else to say. A beautiful card. If you're not using this card, you need to put it in your builds right now. Moving on to the weakest of the White army cards. We have the Evasian, I hope I'm saying this right, Evasian Inquisitors. 85 points from Shadows over Innistrad. So they are at the bottom of the barrel of the White army cards. I don't think they're particularly terrible or anything. They're just very mediocre and they get the job done. I very much like their 2 abilities though. Due to the kind of low-ish number of human figures in AOTP, or at least human creatures in AOTP, their Righteous Purge is going to be active really often. So for the most part, these guys can almost be treated as being 4 power. I think the only other human creatures are the Necro Alchemist, the Mad Prophet, and the Skursdag Cultist. And I don't particularly find the Skursdag Cultist to be anything near meta. Righteous Purge is going to get pretty good value most games, I think. And then their other ability, which allows you to give one of your other squads a +1 power counter. There's pretty much no negative to that. Like, all you have to do is summon these guys, and you get the benefit instantly. Very powerful with the Blazing Fire Cats, because they like all the power they can get. So I think a lot of these guys' cost kind of comes from their abilities, because they're pretty mediocre otherwise. And if they didn't have abilities, I feel like they should be costed more at like 50 points, because they have 2 life and 3 toughness. They're going to die kind of quickly, unfortunately. And it also doesn't really help that they have 5 move and a range of 1, which is kind of just a problem with white in general. With a total threat range of 6, they're just going to struggle with figures like Jace or Nissa with their range of 7, and then Nissa having sprint on top of it. Rock's Veterans coming up from second to the bottom of the barrel at 90 points from the AOP, the original Master Set. Again, they're decent. The Rock's Veterans are, I would call them kind of generic frontline units, maybe a little less offensive than the Evasian Inquisitors, but a little more defensive, and therefore they're better like meat shields or frontline fighters, especially for a pure white build, because then they can get the benefits like Gideon's Phalanx and Honor of the Pure, those kinds of cards. But in general, like if you're playing Sorin or Nahiri, I would probably shelve the Rock's Veterans and use something like the Malakir Blood Chasers or the Blazing Firecats, something with a little more offensive potential. But the Rocks can do their job even in a pure white army. You just have to get your offense from somewhere else other than them. They have Trample, and when you combine things like Inspired Charge or even Divine Favor with the Rocks, once they start getting 4 or 5 power, they can become very threatening. No one wants to mess with them at those numbers. They're very similar to the Pummeroos. They both have Trample, but the Rocks have 1 less base power and 1 less base toughness than the Pummeroos. And in my opinion, in case you can't tell already, I think the Pummeroos are in a better color. I think green is definitely a better color in general than white. And also, the Rock's Veterans are kind of stuck with this battle formation power, which forces them to all stick together. It gives them tons of problems with things like some of the red spells, which deal, damage to like a bunch of adjacent figures, or Sorin, who'll come in and slay a bunch of them in 1 hit. It makes them, again, weak to their own, like, trample. Altogether, I think the Pummeroos are just better than the Rocks. Again, the Rocks had the same struggle as the Evasian Inquisitors, where they have a move of 5 and a range of 1, which means they're going to struggle with the very high range figures or things with sprint like the Elves. But the Rocks get the job done, not terrible. I think they'll survive long enough to let your other figures do whatever they need to do. If you want the Rocks to be a wall for you, I think that's what they're the best at. Next in the list, the Core Aeronaut Captain. I haven't used the Core Aeronaut Captain very much. He does have a beastly 6 power. But I do think Evasian is better than he is, because Evasian, even though she trades down 2 power, she goes down to 4 power, she gets that automatic damage against all adjacent creatures, which I feel like is just silly powerful. Especially when you consider, you factor all the white healing, which just means, Evasian is very hard to kill for your opponent in a lot of situations, so she's going to get a lot of guaranteed value. And the Core Aeronaut Captain can be used kind of similarly, but he doesn't want to fight a ton of creatures. Instead, he wants to kill like a singular hero creature, or even go and assassinate a Planeswalker. And even more fun is that he can, bring a little squaddy along with him, have a buddy tag along with them to go and tie down an enemy Planeswalker if you want. All in all, I think the Core Aeronaut Captain's pretty decent. Again, when he has all of the white healing available to him, he's going to be a thorn in somebody's side. Core Hookmasters, 60 points from the original Arena of the Planeswalkers set. I like to call them the Hookers. Any white build that plans on using squads at all, I feel like these guys are a very good pick, because they offer range where, especially white and black, white and black just suffer from terrible movement and having a lot of range 1 figures. The Hookers can help alleviate some of that problems. They have 5 move and 3 range. Not super, not super wonderful, but I like to use the Hookers, especially in tandem with the Rocks Veterans, because I can have the Rocks Veterans up in front, trying to be a meat shield, and then I have the Hookers right behind them, throwing hooks or whatever the hell they throw from 3 spaces back. And Detain. While Detain, it's a decent power. Part of the problem is, first of all, it doesn't work against heroes. If Detain worked against heroes, I think Hookers would be a lot better. Unfortunately, it only prevents your opponent from taking a turn with a squad of your choice for 1 turn. But the second problem with Detain is that it does not prevent things like Red Seize the Day or Blue's Welcome to the Fold from operating correctly. Because if you read the text on Seize the Day or Welcome to the Fold, or Blue's Welcome to the Fold there, it says nothing about taking a turn. It just says you may move and attack with it. Detain doesn't say that the squad figure can't move or attack. Moving and attacking via a spell is not the same as It's not the same as taking a turn. Still, Detain has a lot of good use when you're up against squads, and I think it is a very worthwhile card. Considering the Hooker's stats at range 3, power 3, life 3, and their cost of 60, I think it's very hard to go wrong with them. They're very formidable. And the cream of the crop of white creatures before I start tackling the Planeswalkers. Evasian Unbloodied Wings for 100 points from Shadows over Innistrad. She is probably the best hero unit in the game. Well, it might be. I'd say it's a pretty close three-way tie between her, the Eldrazi Ruiner, and maybe the Necro Alchemist. A pretty tough call. I think I would still put her at number 1. She's completely insane. Completely insane. If you're using Sorin, Nahiri, Gideon, I think you should strongly consider putting her in the army. She gets immense value from just existing. You never have to roll a combat die with her the entire game, and she can easily deal out 5-6 wounds by just flying around and ending her turn. But just to note, Madness of Angels, it does nothing to Planeswalkers. Read the text, it deals a damage to surrounding creatures. So, don't try to deal automatic damage to your opponent's Planeswalkers. And on that note, you should probably generally use Evasian to kill your opponent's creatures and not their Planeswalkers. A lot of Evasian's value, I think, comes from dealing tons of automatic creature damage. And then again, use your healing. If you're going to use Evasian, at least try to include something like Chaplain's Blessing or Angel's Mercy in your deck. On to the white Planeswalkers. We have Gideon, 350 points from the original Arena of the Planeswalkers set. Gideon, in my opinion, he wins the Wannabe Planeswalker Award. I squarely place him below every other Planeswalker because of his life of 6, his range 1, White's general lack of range and poor mobility, and White's relative lack of ability to put great pressure on with their few aggressive spells. Again, because of their lack of mobility and lack of range. I mean, the only two positives I can really think of for Gideon is that he has the highest base toughness at 5, which is really cool. And he also has Counter-Strike, which just goes really well with his great base toughness. You put him on high ground, and you make him defend against anything, you're probably going to get some Counter-Strike damage in. Really nice. Just shove Gideon on high ground, and then use the rest of your creatures to do the work, because Gideon, he's... I don't really think he's going to put in a whole lot of work by himself, and his relatively weak 6 life, he's really just, I don't think he's very reliable. Use his creatures to deploy white supremacist terrorist acts against his enemies. Don't make Gideon go into the fray. Gideon needs to be on the high ground, and unfortunately with a lot of range figures, that often, when you're playing against range figures, that often means you will have to leave the high ground to go engage them, which means Gideon's going to be on the low ground. Why I think he's the absolute worst Planeswalker of all expansions of AOTP. Next up, we have Nahiri. 345 points from the Shadows over Innistrad set. Kind of go along with what I said about Gideon. I think Nahiri generally wins or loses based on her ability to maintain her height advantage. She has Bulwark, 7 life, 4 toughness, and near-death experience in white for healing. So this all ensures that she's basically one of the toughest Planeswalkers to kill. And luckily, because she has an ability like Lithomancy, where she can just drop tiles underneath her, it should generally make sure that she has the high ground for most of the game, or at least for a good chunk of it. Her lowest range of 4 and her poor power of 3 aren't doing her many favors, especially when she can't maintain high ground. And on a hilly map with tons of elevation changes, I think she kind of struggles to maneuver with Pass-Through Stone. I find the combination of red and white really odd to use, because red is usually about high movement, high destruction, where white is usually more content to hang out and buff their toughness and get their healing going. But luckily, the terribly slow white creatures can definitely appreciate things like Rush of Adrenaline or Sure Strike, or Goblin Warpaint, like things that allow you to move your squad, which, again, white needs anything to help their squads move because they have such terrible threat range. And I think red, again, as I mentioned before, with Divine Favor or even Inspired Charge, when you toss those in tandem with things like the Flamewing Phoenixes or the Bloodline Nobles, or especially the Blazing Fire Cats, this just makes red's already insanely high octane figures even more deadly. they're going to inflict some serious pain. If you think white supremacists are scary in real life, just wait until you see my fire-breathing, pro-human, white Inquisitor figures. I can guarantee you those figures would leave you with PTSD. On to Sorin, who I believe is the strongest white planeswalker. Coming in at 350 points from Shadows over Innistrad. In general, this guy is definitely a planeswalker that actually deserves to be activated, more often than Nahiri or Gideon, especially as he takes more damage and there are more weak figures around him. Reading his abilities, I mean, he just salivates at the thought of weak squads being near him, and especially if they're grouped up. He gets 1 or 2 kills and he heals off tons of damage. His built-in healing is completely insane. But to kind of go in line with some of Black's problems, which I will save mostly for the Black video, but I will say that this makes Sorin weak against heroes because he can't kill heroes quite as easily by himself. And spoiler alert for the Black video, Black kind of sucks at killing heroes. So in that way, that very much makes Sorin half white and half black in that he sucks against heroes. But in general, as long as Sorin doesn't die, like get destroyed in a single turn, he's going to be extremely annoying to remove from the board because he has things like Corrupt, Near-Death Experience, Altar's Reap, and then of course his built-in Vampiric Thirst. He can often carry the late game to a win all by himself when all enemy figures have been weakened and they are ripe to meet their demise at the end of his blade. As far as the mixing of white and black, I'm really torn on this one even more than I am with white and red. I feel like they have similar problems, quite similar problems, in that white and black are both tons of range 1, move 5 figures that are going to struggle against range figures. They like you're walking across the map on the low ground to meet your opponent at their spot, their engagement spot of choice. Black is hilariously overpowered in killing squads, whether it's their own squads or their opponent's squads. But white generally likes their total white domination armies in things like Honor of the Pure or Gideon's Phalanx, which want them to have only white figures and not black figures. Then you toss in things like Black's Killing Wave, which deals 3 damage to all of the non-zombie squad creatures, which can kill a lot of your own white squaddies when you're fielding white squads. And then you have White's Fell the Mighty, which kills all non-white squads next to your Planeswalker, which includes your own black squads. So there's a lot of conflict. Well, white and black love to be close to their enemies, and in White's case, they like to be close to themselves. But the problem is, there's a lot of conflict in how white's spells and black spells operate, where they don't like each other a lot at all. You just have to be careful with your selection of cards, army cards and spell cards, if you're going to use Sorin and mix black and white together. Congratulations, you made it to the end of the video. My final thoughts on whites: if I had to generalize white as a color in AOTP, I would say they are most similar to like a really fat, heavily armored knight that moves very slowly and like wants to kill you with like a giant axe or a giant hammer or sword or something. But also that knight is weak to magic. Like when you think of a heavily armored knight in a video game, it's like they get killed very easily by like a fire spell or an electricity spell or something. I think that's very similar to what AOTP's white is like. Click like, click subscribe, and leave me some comments. Let me know what you think. Let me know why, Sorin is the worst planeswalker, or why you think total white domination should be higher than rank 3 for heroes and rank 6 for white in general. I'll be listening, and we'll see you in the next tier list video.